What's going on, guys? This is Tower number 9 here, and today we're going to be talking about two different ways to play Red Iden, the more traditional style and the harder control style that some have been playing recently, which I think is actually very interesting. So yeah, let's get into it. Um, so First, we're going to talk about the more traditional Iden Reds. This was something that I think I popularized to some degree, but it was originally based off a deck that I saw from Carbon. Shout out to Carbon for being the one who tipped me off to this. So basically, this is a control-ish deck. It's more resilient to aggro than some, and it's maybe a little more like on the mid-range side of things and less of like a hard control deck. It generally runs Tarkin Town to finish off an enemy unit. You use your red removal and trading cards to empower Power of the Dark Side early, and you run some powerful late game units to try to close things out. If you want to get much more detail on this, I had a video earlier that I did with Rebel Resources where I explained the deck a bunch. I'll have a link to that in the comments of this or in the video description of this video. But here's the deck at least at the time that I was talking about it originally with Rebel Resource. I think I would probably make some changes to this build today, but looking at this, we have some small units that enable some early trading, Snow Trooper Lieutenant to help with that, a fair amount of removal, taking advantage of the red early removal cards like Forced Choke, Open Fire, Imperial Interceptor. You also have the Death Star Stormtrooper in there, who can be another early trading unit, and your goal is to try and clear the board, hit the opponent hard with Power of the Dark Side, and then move into your endgame, where this deck had 3 Raiders, 2 copies of Count Dooku, and 2 copies of Emperor Palpatine, which at the time that it was created was actually a very heavy endgame. I think that things have kind of moved towards a phase where we're seeing more decks with bigger endgame investments, so you might need to do more than that today, though I do note that the sideboard there also had Palpatine and 2 Avengers. Anyway, I'm not going to go into too much detail about this build, but this is kind of the more conventional way to play it, maybe. And recently I did that interview with Envert, and we were discussing, and he actually brought up Iden Red, and I saw some people in the comments who seemed to think that he was talking about my Iden Red build at that time, but I actually am not sure that's the case. I think he may have been talking about this other style of Iden Red build, which I'm gonna call it Mind Tricks because that's the name that was given to it by Z Storm from the Team Covenant Discord, who I believe is the first person who came up with this concept. I've also, seen people say Event Iden. I sometimes call it Oops All Removal, though that more refers to an earlier version of the deck that had extremely few units, like not even playing Imperial Interceptor and Death Trooper in main deck. But yeah, it's a very different style of deck. It's very heavy on removal. It has board clears, and it actually has an alternate win condition where you're going to try to mill people out using Vigilance. So let's take a look at what this build looks like. As far as I know, this is the latest version of it that Z-Storm has published publicly on SWU. So shout out to Z-Storm for this and for really innovating this concept. And if you look at this, one of the first things that you'll see is that it just has way fewer early game units because you're not really trying to fight for the board in the early game as much. There's 3 Death Star Stormtroopers and 3 Inferno 4s, but there's only 6 early game plays there. There is the potential of entrenching an opposing unit early. I actually don't like that in my style of Iden Red because I think entrenched as removal is very anti-synergistic with Power of the Dark Side because you're giving the opponent a unit that they can easily remove without losing their aggro, but it makes a lot more sense in a build where you're running things like Super Laser Blast, where you can entrench a unit and stall things for a bit, and then Super Laser Blast to wipe the board. This deck is running 2 Super Laser Blasts main deck, as well as 1 in the sideboard. It also has some of those early red removal cards, like Forced Choke, Open Fire, Imperial Interceptor. Not running the Ruthless Raider, but does have a heavier endgame with 3 Dooku, 3 Palpatine, and actually 3 Avengers in the main deck. So the really spicy cards in this deck though are Vigilance and Restock. So Vigilance, we're gonna have a focus on that here. So out of aspect Vigilance, this card is gonna cost 6 because you only have a single command and only a single Vigilance aspect in the build. And so this was originally included in Z-Storm's version to mill in control mirrors, and it's extremely strong in control mirrors. It's kind of the central card there actually. So it's sort of an alternate win condition, but it can become the primary way to win win, because discarding 6 cards from an opponent's deck will get them running out of options pretty fast, and they start taking fatigue damage from having no cards. So if you play a deck with this Vigilance and you're in a control mirror, as long as you are, let's say you guys are trading 1-for-1 removal, and they play something and then you clear it, and then you play something and they clear it, and so on. Those games can go really long, and they can go without there being any clear winner. And Vigilance is a way around that. So with Vigilance, you can use that to discard cards from your opponent's deck, and that will not only deplete their options, so they'll run out of stuff, but it will also start dealing damage, because you'll have that you'll start having that damage inflicted via fatigue. So if you would draw a card but can't in this game, you take 3 damage to your base. And it's worth noting that Vigilance's discarding 6 cards from an opponent's deck does not trigger fatigue damage in itself. So if the opponent has no cards in deck, I cannot play Vigilance and make them take 18 damage, because Vigilance does not make them draw a card. It would just discard a card from the deck. So I believe that does not work. I would have to check the rules and so on, but it's still very good for getting people into that situation. And once you get them there are some other cards that do cause them to draw a card. For instance, if you play a Forced Choke on your opponent's unit when they have no card in deck, no cards left in deck, they actually try to draw a card, can't, and take 3 damage. So that makes Forced Choke's downside into an upside if you've managed to mill your opponent out. And the other thing about Vigilance is that it's not unplayable in other builds. So against like aggro, you can be like, oh, I'm going to take out a unit and heal 5 damage from the base. And it's like paying 6 for that isn't like amazing. If you think about other cards that can do kind of similar things, like 6 is kind of expensive for that, but you have that flexibility, and it gets better later on in the game as you're resourcing more things. And sometimes that healing can be just what you need to stabilize and win. Like 5 points of damage on the base, healing that can be precious against an aggro deck. Additionally, it has a somewhat similar effect to the card Make an Opening, in that it can be used to defeat certain units through their shields. And this is most relevant in, I think, the Boba Fett matchup, where Crafty Smuggler and Seventh Fleet Defender are both commonly played cards in that matchup, and they both have 3 or less HP when played, but they come in with a shield. So Vigilance can defeat those units through their shields while also getting you another effect. And while playing cards out of aspect usually isn't good, the strength and flexibility of Vigilance and the fact that it enables this alternate win condition can actually be really relevant. So in order to counter that, in mirrors, we have Restock. And so Restock is a really interesting card. It's a 1-cost event. You choose up to 4 cards in a discard pile, put them on the bottom of their owner's deck in a random order. So this is basically being included as a mirror breaker against other control decks that are playing Vigilance, not necessarily Vigilance the aspect, but Vigilance the card. And so basically this allows you to put cards back in your own deck to avoid being milled out. And Restock, so in some games, cards like this would remove themselves from the game once played, so you can't chain them. Restock does not do that. So if you play 1 Restock and put cards in your discard on the bottom of the deck, you could later draw another Restock, play it, and return the first Restock to the bottom of your deck. And then when you get to that, you could play it and return the second Restock. So in theory, you can kind of chain this endlessly. And these mirrors sometimes lead to these weird dynamics where you try to time your Vigilances to clear your opponent's Restocks, or otherwise clear out their good cards and leave them in a tough position. In general, Restock is a really, really bad card in other matchups, but if you're worried about that mirror, it can actually be super important, and you can always resource it, and that's one of the benefits of this situation. Now, some people might ask, well, if this is like for one specific mirror situation, why is it in main deck? Well, the answer is simple and unfortunate. If you're in a situation with multiple Vigilances and Restocks and stuff being played over and over, and the game goes really long, it is very possible that a best of 3 will not even complete game 2. And as a result of that, it's actually really important to be pre-sideboarded for that, so that in the event that you guys only complete 1 game, you will hopefully win in game 1 and then be in a good position to win the match if other rounds don't complete. And that's an unfortunate fact of life about the timing structure and tournament rules. I wish it were not this way. I think it's sort of a weird and artificial situation, and I don't I don't like it when the timing rules encourage kind of odd stuff like that. But I do think that running at least some of your restocks in main deck is correct in this scenario where you're worried about a mirror, and especially about a mirror that goes really long. So as we can see here, Z-Storm's version of the build here does have 2 restocks in the main deck, and the third copy is in the sideboard, but the 2 main deck copies are there in case you end up in that control mirror, and the games are going to be big. Now, of course, you should also try to learn to play your deck fast to avoid this, but unfortunately, another kind of fact of life is that if people don't really understand your strategy or are trying to figure it out on the fly, they might well take a bunch of the time themselves. And Star Wars Unlimited does not currently use chess clocks in competitive play, so if your opponent ends up taking a bunch of time against you in thinking, that sort of often ends up being a problem for both players. Um, and again, kind of is what it is. If they implement chess clocks, that would be a different story. But um, as it stands, time is a concern in some of these games. But there is one other side benefit of Restock, and that is that you can use it to target opponents to deny recursion. So I think the main situation where this would be relevant is against Green Han. So Green Han tends to run Home 1 and tends to at least sometimes run Rogue Squadron Skirmisher, which are both cards that return things from your discard to hand, or in Home 1's case to play. In principle, you could play Restock on your opponent if you see that they have things that would be especially good targets and you think they're about to play that. You could play Restock on your opponent and remove those targets, send them to the bottom of their deck so that they won't get the opportunity to use that recursion. But this is like a pretty niche use, at least at this time. In the future, we'll see whether or not that becomes more relevant. It's entirely possible. Recursion can often be very strong in games. But in this case, I believe its main purpose is as a mirror breaker against other Vigilance control decks. So yeah, there you have it. There's 2 really different styles of Red Iden. I think both of these can do well. So there was the big UK tournament a week or 2 ago. I don't remember the exact date. And at that tournament, 2 Idens actually went 6-2, I believe, or X and 2, and it was one with each style. So there was one of those Idens used a more conventional Red Iden deck, and I believe that the person who ran that actually commented and said it was basically the same as my build. Um, and then the other one was a much more event control, or oops all removal style of Iden or whatever. And I see this as basically being mostly about playstyle. So both of these would probably be considered control decks, but the more conventional one is more mid-rangey, and the more event-focused one is more control-oriented. And it's very cool that there are 2 distinct styles of play here with the same hero and even the same base so early. In a lot of games early on in the first set, like a certain character or a certain style like kind of builds itself, and there's like one way to do it. But these seem to be like notably distinct decks. They've both actually had some good results early on, at least. And that's I think that's testament to the interesting nature and depth of the first set here for Star Wars Unlimited. I'll also say that Command Iden's also an option. I do tend to favor Iden Red, but I don't think Iden Green is dead. I know KTOD recently posted a updated Iden Green deck that I think incorporated some of the tech or styles from Iden Red, so it's actually incorporating that out of Aspect Vigilance itself now, I believe. And it'll be interesting to see how these decks evolve further, and if one of them becomes clearly more successful. Um, I think, personally, I like the style of play of the more conventional build more, but I can't, I have to admit, the event and more control focused one it's not a joke. I think it's a very real deck, and I'll be interested to see where things go as things progress. So yeah, feel free to let me know which of these styles appeals more to you in the comments below, or if there's some other factor. If you're like, hey, I came up with the sickest deck. It's Iden Yellow. Nobody's on it yet, and I think it's really good. Yeah, feel free to talk about that as well. I like Iden in this game. I think she's very cool, and I am interested to see where the future of Iden deck development ends up going, whether that be with red, green, or other colors. So yeah, that's gonna about do it for this one, guys. Just wanted to record this video in part to point out that I think some of the people who were giving me the credit for Invert's remarks on Red Iden may have been premature in that. I think he may well have been discussing something that is more attributable to Z-Storm and this Mind Trick style deck. So I wanted to make sure that Z-Storm got the proper credit for that style of build and maybe open some people's eyes to different ways of playing the character. Anyway, that's going to be about it for this one. If any of you have comments, questions, suggestions, feel free to reach out either in the comments or talk to me on Discord or whatever it is. Always happy to hear suggestions from the viewers. But yeah, we'll be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. I will catch you guys later.